Okay, so now we're having a look at some other rules to keep into account when you're simplifying your ratios. And the first one that we're going to look at on the screen at the moment is that each quantity in the ratio needs to be expressed in the same units, which once they're expressed in the same units, you can actually leave them out. So this might be if you were had a ratio which had something in meters and to something in centimeters. You need to write them both in centimeters or both in meters to start with. Or if you were doing a recipe and one had cups of something and one had tablespoons of something, if you want to write it as a ratio, you really actually need to put them in the same unit. So it might be either weight or something like that. So a really good example will be the meters and centimeters one. So if I had 25 meters to 1500 centimeters, the first thing I've got to do to simplify it is change to, in this case I'm going to change to centimeters. So 25 meters is the same as saying 2500 centimeters because there's 100 centimeters in each meter. 1500 centimeters doesn't change, so I can just write that out again. And now I can go, oh well, they're both centimeters. So now when I write it, I can write it without the unit. So 2500 to 1500. And then the last little step is what we were doing last time, which is finding that common factor, finding what you can divide them both by and getting the smallest number possible. So in this case, if I divide both by 500, 2500 divided by 500 is 5, and 1500 divided by 500 is 3. So this is what we would call the simplest form because it no longer has different units. And it's the smallest number that you could divide both those by. So that would be the correct answer if you had to simplify 25 metres to 1500 centimetres. Okay, so the next little rule that we need, and this one's a really simple one, is that when you are trying to write the simplest ratio, is that the ratio should always be written using whole numbers, so like 1, 2 or 3, not 1.5 or 1.5 or 3.024. And if they are, you actually need to manipulate it so that you can make them into whole numbers. So the example that I'm going to use is a ratio of 2.5 to 1 to 3. This isn't in simplest form because 2.5 is not a whole number. So we have to figure out how we're going to make it a whole number, and I've chosen an easy one here. So if I double all of those numbers, I will get to the point where they are whole numbers. So I'm going to times each of those numbers by 2. I'll do it on the side over here. So 2.5 times 2 is equal to 5, which is now a whole number. 1 times 2 is equal to 2, and 3 times 2 is equal to 6. Now the important thing is I multiplied them all by the same amount, or the times 2. So 2.5 to 1 to 3 is equivalent to 5 to 2 to 6, which is the simplest form of 2.5 to 1 to 3. So simplest form because it's whole numbers. So that's the end of this tutorial. So the two important concepts that you have learnt here is that each quantity in the ratio must be expressed in the same units, which should then be left out, and that ratios must always be written with whole numbers.